Welcome to Football Geeks. My guest today has held a number of senior positions in the arena of British sport: Chief Executive of the FA, Head of BBC Sport, Editor of Match of the Day, and Chairman of the RFL, to name but a few. His contribution to British sport saw him awarded an OBE for his services to sport and broadcasting in 2021. He has recently released a new book, 60 Years of the World Cup, Reflections on Football's Greatest Show on Earth, a retrospective in which the reader is guided through 16 world tournaments. It gives me great pleasure to have Brian Barwick, OBE, with me today. Brian, welcome.
Yeah, great to be on the call. Great to be on the call.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for doing this for us, Brian. It's very exciting for me to have a big fish as a guest.
Large whale.
I've heard you like swimming as well, so yeah, that's probably very active.
I do very little other than swim at the moment, but anyway, I'm swimming. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I love it. I love getting in the pool myself. It's one of my favourite things. So thanks for coming, Brian. So the book, 60 years of the World Cup. Tell us a little bit about that. What were the motivations behind writing the book?
Okay. Well, I wrote a book years ago called 60 Years of Red and Counting, which was a reflection of 60 years of following Liverpool Football Club. From 1960, the first game I saw Liverpool Football Club was in 1961. So in 2021, I'd done 60 years, and I did almost an essay on every season from the club's perspective, my own perspective, when the two married up with each other, some of the characters I met during that period, and pitch publishers liked it a lot and got very nicely reviewed. So we had a discussion a little bit down the track, and they asked me what else I could do along those lines, and I gave them two options really, which was 60 years of the FA Cup final, which may still be written, I suppose, and 60 years of the World Cup, because the first World Cup I remember was as an 8-year-old schoolboy watching a little bit of the 1962 World Cup from Chile, and off it went, really.
Yeah, I suppose
off it went, and it's got its own framework. You don't have to work at what the framework is. It's got its own framework, and you have to build yourself in and around it.
Oh, great. I mean, that's 1962. That was when the Pathé films were still being shipped over. So you'd watch the game coverage a couple of days later. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a Telstar, the satellite, hadn't. The record had come to number one in the chart, but the actual Telstar itself hadn't. And quite an operation, really, to get film cans to New York in the first place, to get them developed in New York and then air freighted across to London, where they were broadcast roughly 48 hours after the games had played, including the World Cup final itself.
So the score, everyone was already aware of what the score was. It was just
and if you think 1.5 billion people watched the World Cup final in December, and there weren't that sort of numbers watching in 1962, I can assure you.
No, I bet. Yeah, I don't think anyone had a television at that stage, did they? It was
I mean, people talk about, you get a lot of people, when I was the editor of Match of the Day, saying they remember watching the first one. Well, the first one was only broadcast in London, and it was only broadcast on a new thing called BBC Two. So it's a bit like the 500,000 people who said they were at the World Cup final in '66.
Yeah, there always seems to be these kind of these hangers-on who make that claim, doesn't there? So, but the '62 one is the one that immediately that's the one that caught your imagination to start with. So everyone remembers their first one, isn't it? Like everyone remembers their first Doctor Who, isn't it? So but so that captured the imagination. So I'm presuming that the one where you were really engrossed, where you're at kind of the real excitement came from, was the '66 one. Can you tell us a little bit about that tournament and your attachment to it?
Well, the '66 World Cup absolutely grabbed people's attention, not least because obviously it was in England, and we were about to get the world of football come to our shores. And in fact, I lived in Liverpool. I was born and raised in Liverpool. And the group that Northwest England had was Bulgaria, Hungary, Portugal, and Brazil. And Brazil, of course, had won in '58 and won in '62. So they were a big ticket item. And Pele, Garrincha. And yeah, we all were absolutely transfixed by it. One night, a game would be on BBC, another night it would be on ITV. And it was also a small tournament. There was only 16 teams in it, and it was over in 3 weeks. I managed to get to see a game in it, which was Portugal-Brazil, which is a phenomenal game to have had the opportunity to see. That was Eusebio, Pele, and an incredible game of football.
Oh, fantastic, mate! Yeah, it was quite a tournament, and obviously it had a result that we were all happy with.
Yeah, I mean the interesting thing also about that particular World Cup and its infancy in a way was all 4 quarter-finals started at 3 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon.
Okay.
And BBC and ITV both decided to transmit England-Argentina. So while England-Argentina was getting underway, you kept getting this score flash from Goodison Park when North Korea were beating Portugal 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 1-3, 2-3, 3-3, 4-3, 5-3. So it's inconceivable now. You'd have 4 quarterfinals start at the same time, and everybody just concentrate on one.
Yeah, it's. I mean, TV rights now sort of dictate that everyone gets to see everything, don't they?
Well, so, there's logic in it. But I mean, yeah, and then the World Cup final itself was one of those days where you bagged your seat near the armchair in the armchair about midday, and didn't get out of it until about 6 o'clock when they were running around, famously Nobby Styles doing his little dance with the World Cup, having won the World Cup. And it was a big occasion, and I tell the story in the book, they don't underestimate. And people, I feel very privileged as a football supporter, first and foremost, to have been alive and of an age where I can remember it, absolutely remember it, watching it. And during that early part of my life, I used to type little match reports of the games I was watching on the television, which was a precursor to me getting a job, I suppose, further down the track. And my father was a policeman, and he was on nights, and he would take those little bits of paper, and during a quiet moment in the police station, he'd actually type them onto a real typewriter and make them look a bit smarter. Just wish I had them somewhere, but then they've well and truly gone. But yeah, 66, massive. And then 2 weeks after the final itself, it was at Goodison Park when Everton played Liverpool in the Charity Shield. And before the game, Ray Wilson and Roger Hunt ran around with the World Cup.
Oh, and, incredible.
It was a special moment, still one of the most special moments.
I've seen some fabulous photographs of that on on social media of that particular occasion, and then it led on. England world champions, and with arguably player for player a better squad than the 1966 team that they took to the 1970 World Cup.
Yeah, I mean. You asked me to pick out some games, and from 66 Portugal, Brazil. A bus ride to the World Cup. In fact, I didn't know I was going there. My father was walking around the pitch. He was one of those guys who was a policeman walking around the pitch, and he managed to get 3 tickets right at the last moment. So we dived on the 6C and got down Queen's Drive and walked to Goodison Park. So my mind was already set that this was important. 1970. First colour TV World Cup, although such were the links. It always looked. I always described it as a watercolor in a pouring rain. I mean, there was all sorts of colours, but not necessarily in the right order. And it was a fantastic tournament. It's probably everybody's favourite tournament for those who've been around, because it was Brazil in their pomp. It was Pelé in his pomp. But big England went with a real strong squad, and Ramsey always had a stronger squad than '66. And there were three games on a Sunday evening, on successive Sunday evenings: England, Brazil, England, West Germany, and then Brazil, Italy. So if I had to pick one of those three, it would be Brazil, Italy, the final. Yeah. Although the other two were mega games: England, Brazil. Jorginho scores in the end, with a 1-0 game. But in truth, England had a couple of really good chances at the end. And then against Germany, we're 2-0 up and lost to two silly goals, poor defensive goals, to 2-2, and lost in extra time. And Brazil, Italy happened to fall on my 16th birthday. I don't think they deliberately put it on that day because it was my birthday, but it did anyway. And as well as Pelé scoring, Carlos Alberto's fourth goal, or the fourth goal in the game, still remains for me one of my all-time favourite goals. It was Brazil at their best, 5 passes and then a fantastic shot from the edge of the box into the corner. So yeah, I have a lot of memories of that, not least that it totally cocked up my O-level results, because the games were on at 10 o'clock at night, other than those three I've mentioned, funny enough, which were pulled forward for television reasons. I meant that England were kicking off at midday in Mexico, so the heat got to them in those two games they played against Brazil and Germany for certain. But yeah, Brazil, Italy, Pelé in his pomp, Brazil, everybody's team really, in a way, in many cases, and a brilliant goal from Carlos Alberto.
Yeah, it was a telepathy from Pelé, wasn't it? He just knew that Carlos Alberto was bombing down the right-hand side, making that run. And funnily enough, in an act of symmetry, my 1986 O-level results were ruined by the Mexican World Cup as well, in very much the same way that you described. I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning watching the England games in that World Cup. So yeah, a little bit of footballing symmetry there.
Yeah, you go, absolutely.
So moving on to other games that have really grabbed your.
I picked out the next one. I picked out was Spain, Northern Ireland in 1982, which was partly because by then I was working for the BBC. I had a school at a university. I had done 3 years as a reporter on the Northwest Evening Mail, which is a grand title, but it was the Barrow and Furness Bugle, really. And but I got a 6-month attachment contract at the BBC Sport. It was advertised in the UK Press Gazette, and I applied for it, and amazingly, I got it. And then after 6 months, they decided I could stick around. And so 1982, the World Cup was in Spain. I was waiting to see if I get picked as part of the production team, and I was picked as the second producer with the England team, which was tremendous, because it meant somebody was more senior to me, which suited me perfectly at the time, but I could be there. As it happened, just before the World Cup started, the guy that was going to be the producer at England left to go to ITV, and I was either promoted or relegated to run the Northern Ireland section, because they were short of somebody to do that. And in fact, I was disappointed in a way, because the theory was you left the tournament as a producer once your team left the competition. I thought, well, Northern Ireland, they're going to go out early, but they ended up being one of the stories of the tournament, and of course beat the host Spain famously with a goal by Jerry Armstrong, and went on to get to the second phase, which was a 3-team group, France and Yugoslavia. That's the way they did it in that particular tournament. But as well as having the rare distinction of working with David Icke, who went on to all sorts of different things in life.
Yes.
I also ended up, to my surprise, being in the official film, the official FIFA film, Goalie, because and I didn't know I was in it until I went to the cinema to watch it, and sure enough, it was a feature within a feature. Spain losing their game, and there were scenes at the end of the game where the media were rushing on to try and get the interviews, and I'd been told by my boss in Madrid, you've got to try and get an interview with the goal scorer and the coach if in the unlikely thing that Northern Ireland win. So where's something we can see you in? So I wore a red cap, and sure enough, in this goal film, you see this very svelte young 27-year-old BBC producer racing behind Jerry Armstrong and Billy Bingham, and a yard ahead of the ITV producer.
Oh, well done, sir.
Well, sure enough, whenever it's on at Christmas or something, I have to hide behind the settee because my boys take the mickey out of me. But it was a remarkable thing, that World Cup, because it was also a great World Cup. You know, there's some great games in it. Brazil,
an incredibly potent Brazil side again, wasn't it? Incredibly easy on the
I was
eye.
also blessed with. I spent a lot of time with Bobby Charlton in that World Cup, because he was a pundit, and he was a sort of travelling pundit, and a great guy to be around. And we're in Madrid for one game, and he knocked on the door of my hotel door, and he says, "Are we doing anything tonight, Brian?" Because I would sort of plan the day. I said, "No, actually, I haven't got anything." And he said, "Well, the Rolling Stones are playing at the Atletico Madrid Stadium tonight, and we've just been invited by the Rolling Stones management to go and see the concert. Do you fancy it?" So absolutely. So we went to see the Rolling Stones, went backstage with them after the show, and the following morning I wrote a postcard to my parents to say, all going well here in Spain. Went to see the Rolling Stones in Madrid last night with Bobby Charlton, and in the end I couldn't send it. I thought that is such a ridiculous. That's such a just being backstage with Rolling Stones with Bobby Charlton. So, and then on the day of the final, I hadn't been sent home because although Ireland went out, they wanted to stick around. The boss had me in the office, and I thought he was going to, I don't know, God knows what he was going to do, but he said, "I've got your ticket for the final." So I went to the final, and Italy was staying in the same hotel I was. So after the game, and after all the kerfuffle after the game, I went back to my hotel as the Italians arrived, and the place was going bonkers. And so they slammed the door shut in this sort of hall so the players could enjoy the World Cup win. And the only other person in there was me, because as we were all getting pushed, I was pushed in the door rather than out of the door. And so there was Dino Zoff, Paolo Rossi, and Brian Barwick in this thing for 10 minutes before they said, "Excuse me, you better go." So I had the full experience. Fantastic, actually. I mean, fantastic when I think about it.
Amazing.
I moved on.
Yeah.
So the next one I looked at was 1998, which was France-Brazil, the final. And the reason I picked that game is the story behind it for me personally was that I was now at ITV and running ITV Sport, and we'd had a bit of luck because when the games were all divided up, once the draw was made, I was on gardening leave because I'd just left the BBC to join ITV, which was pretty sacrosanct in those days. But anyway, not now. And the BBC had allowed ITV to take the last 16 games. The last 16, the BBC had said ITV, so BBC could concentrate quarter-final, semi-final, and hopefully final. The last 16 should have been England, Croatia in the afternoon, if England had won the group, and that they didn't. So England played Argentina in that last 16 game. Big game for all sorts of football and all sorts of political reasons. The game went to extra time, the game went to penalties, and there were 27 million people watching it, which is the biggest audience ITV have ever had. So we stumbled on that, although we made a big... I had to stop ITV's PR people. They had to be... I said, you've got to put out a very balanced PR statement on this, because we're all thrilled about the audience, but England had gone out. So, and we managed to find the right words. The actual day of the final was a Sunday, and it was the day of the British Grand Prix. And it was my first year with ITV, so I had to be at it. It was the World Cup final. But because the World Cup final was in Paris, I thought to myself, I can probably get to both of these. So, sure enough, during the morning, I was in the paddock, meeting all the drivers and all the key principals, then walking on the track before the race. And once the race finished, myself, Jim Rosenthal, the presenter, and the technician, we got 3 mopeds to a helicopter to a light aircraft that was waiting for us at Oxford Airstrip. And that flew into Le Bourget Airport in Paris. I'm having a glass of champagne on this plane. I'm pinching myself, really, thinking this is ridiculous, you know. And remember my biology teacher saying, "Barwick, you'll go nowhere, you'll do no good." And I was thinking, do you know what, Mr. Tompkinson? I've got news for you. We landed, we got a car waiting. There was a car waiting for us, and because France were in the final, the streets were empty. So we managed to get to the stadium very quickly, just in time for the start. And it was Brian Moore's last commentary for ITV. So it was important for me to be there anyway. At half time, I had to go to Lucas. I just hadn't been Luke. And I closed the door and realised there was no handle on the inside. I couldn't get out of the loo. And the noise outside, when people go in the loo and talking about the first album, it went quieter and quieter and quieter, because everybody's going back in the stadium. And as the game kicked off, I was still in that loo, and for the second time. And I thought, you know, smart Alec, moped, helicopter, private jet, glass of champagne, private car, best seat in the house, now in a toilet, and you can't get out. And I just heard a guy going past whistling, and it was French, cleaner. And I just had enough French. I had absolutely an O-level French suddenly came staring into my, and I managed to get it open, or he got it open. And I went back, and Brian Moore was doing the commentary. I arrived 10 minutes after him. He put his hand over the mic and said, "Where have you been?" I said, "I'm checking another story." But I was there. It was a very good moment of bringing you back down to earth, because all of those wonderful sort of smart Alec things, but I was in the loo. So that's a famous game for me. Of course, France won it, and it was an amazing scenes in Paris that night. You know, it's special. And for me, having left the BBC to go to ITV, which was a big gamble anyway. You know, we had a great World Cup in that respect, other than England not winning it, you know. But and then I came to, you asked me to sort of come up with 5. I come up with the last one, which was the last one. Argentina versus France, a hell of a game. I mean, remarkable game of football. 2 masters of the game, Mbappe and Messi, putting together a game that I think it was a 3 o'clock kickoff on Sunday afternoon. It just grabbed everybody's attention. It wasn't just about football fans, and it wasn't just about sports fans. People came to the game and stayed with the game. It was one of the most remarkable games of football probably that's ever been, and it happened to be on a World Cup final. It's so that's the mix and match of the sort of games and some of the incidents around it that have hopefully made the book more interesting than a commentary on the games. It was about the stuff that was happening to me and the stuff that was happening and that I saw and heard and watched around it. So that was the idea before it, and that's what I put together.
Oh, fab. Everyone, but in regards to talking about the final in the Qatar World Cup, I think what it did do, I mean, I always fresh and exciting again.
That was all of those things. I mean, it's a remarkable game, and people have said, well, it was the best ever game of football. Well, it was probably the best ever biggest game of football. The World Cup finals, the World Cup final, and there's been some dull World Cup finals. I went to South Africa and watched the final there between Holland and Spain, and it went on forever and ever and ever.
It was just 120 minutes of sheer attrition, wasn't it? It wasn't a good watch at all. But it certainly,
that one. I mean, that particular one, I went with a friend just as a fan, football fan, and we got on a coach, and the coach got to the car park about 3 hours before the game. Fair enough. We were the first coach in the car park because 3 people went missing. We were the last coach to leave that car park. So our day, and the game wasn't very good, to say the least. So that was a very long, tedious, tortuous day. But that's how. You asked about, I think, a favourite World Cup. Well, a World Cup that I had special affection for was Italia '90. Now, Italia '90, for all sorts of reasons. Firstly, it's the first time I was in charge of BBC's coverage of it, so that's quite a prestigious moment, professional moment. And it came off the back of a decade where football was really struggling. We'd had the tragedy of Hillsborough and Bradford. We'd had Heysel. We had a lot of hooliganism knocking around. The game needed a lift. And that World Cup, although it was pretty average football play, was dramatic.
Yeah.
And we also hit on Nessun Dorma. There's a lot of people claim who picked Nessun Dorma, and I'm normally in that pack. Although whether I did or didn't, I know I'm the person who managed to keep it on the air because we got this piece of music, and it had to be it's longer than 50 seconds, but titles 52 seconds, something like that. So the sound boys cut together a great version of it. And I thought, this is a special piece of music. And the day before the World Cup started, I got a phone call from the head of Decca Classical Records to say, we've thought about your use of this piece of music. And on reflection, we don't think it's right for the maestro to be connected in this way to the sport. And I said, well, too late. We've made the titles. The titles, I believe you me, will win awards, which they did. And I think you'll find that by the end of the World Cup, you'll be ringing me up and saying, thank you. This is a beautiful piece of music sung by a maestro. I said, you sound like the man who sold the Beatles. I mean, this is a real opportunity of getting classical music. The games are in peak time television. You're going to get huge audience. Anyway, I said, we're going ahead and using it to see what happens. And sure enough, after about a week, you know, the milkman was whistling it, and everybody tried to hit that note at the end. And I think you had to be Italian and a tenor to get there. You know, we all had a go, and this thing just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, a year later, there were 250,000 people in Hyde Park watching a free concert of Pavarotti. And Classic FM started, it's now 26 or 27 years old, off the back of it, because some bright sparks thought that, you know, there's a soft element to classical music that's probably not on Radio 3 and BBC, because they do it a certain style, and it's still you know, doing very well. And 4 years later, on the night before the World Cup final in USA, Des Lynam and I were invited to see the three tenors. They'd done a thing in Rome. This was now in the Los Angeles Dodger Stadium, and Decca sent us good tickets. So we got to we got four. So Terry Venables came as well with his wife, and we knew these tickets would be good. We didn't know how good. So we're just going past Hollywood A-listers, Hollywood A-listers, Hollywood A-listers. So we're about 4 rows from the front. And just before the concert started, there was a stream of people walking past the people in the front row, staring at them and stopping at a particular moment and going. So we joined them just to fill the time in. And those two people were Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly. So we were living the dream. We were living the dream.
Oh, you got some real scrapes. Some real scrapes with the celebrity. Did Pavarotti ever give you a percentage for your involvement in kind of reigniting his career, Brian?
No. But very interestingly, about 4 years ago, I got a phone call, and an American voice, a lady's voice, saying, "Hello, are you Mr. Brian Barwick?" I said, "I am." And she gave her name. She said, "I'm just on the freeway going into Los Angeles." And I thought, who's winding me up? Who's winding me up here? So she said, the Ron Howard, you'll know Ron Howard, a big producer, you know, he's done big films. 2 years ago, he did a documentary on the Beatles, and now he's going to do one on Pavarotti. And your name keeps coming up, and we'd like to fly over to London to interview you. So I said, sure. Give me a call back in a couple of weeks, thinking that would go away. And also I'd find out who actually was on the end of that phone. But sure enough, a fortnight later, this lady phoned again and said, "I'm still on the freeway. I'm going to Los Angeles, going into the studio. We're coming over in 10 days to a place called Teddington." And I said, "All right, Teddington." "Yeah, Teddington. So, and we'd like to interview you and another couple of guys. We're going to do 3 interviews." So she said, "We'll pick you up at 2:30. We have a limousine ready." Now, I didn't tell her that I lived a mile from where I live in Twickenham, which is right next to Teddington. So anyway, this car picks me up, takes me to this old school, which they've set up as a film studio. And I go to hair and makeup, and as you can see, we didn't have to waste too much time on the hair and plenty of time on the makeup. Anyway, did the interview, and same questions. How was it picked? What was special behind it? All the rest of it, and good questions, of course, and legitimate questions, because we had managed to. Pavarotti was world famous to a certain sector of the public, but he became super world famous to lots of other people. Anyway, the film was made, and about 2 weeks before it was put out there, I got a personal letter from Ron Howard to say, "Thank you so much, Brian, for taking part in this. Your interview has informed the way the film looks, However, your interview actually isn't in it, but we're keeping it in our archive, which meant I ended up on the cutting room floor, which I thought once again, I thought fair enough. But there's some of the weird wonderful experiences.
You could have been a cinema star, Brian. You could have been,
yeah. You know, have a look at Golay. That's what I say. Have a look at 1982.
Oh, you're there in your red cap.
Anyway, that's my sort of stuff.
Oh, fabulous, mate. So moving back into the kind of modern era, I asked you to think about how you felt modern football sort of sits in reference to football from the an older kind of time. Evidently it's more technical, it's faster, but is it better in your opinion?
Well, it's still for me anyway the best game, the best sport, and if you look at the World Cup final, that was possibly one of its finest. So you can't say many of it. So many elements have made it a worse game. I don't think it is, but I think we all have. We grow up loving the game as young people, and our footballers are heroes, aren't they? You know, when I was watching it in the early '60s, you didn't see the players till 5-3. There was no warming up on the pitch, and half time was 10 minutes. It wouldn't matter whether somebody had been injured for half the first half. 10 minutes, and the games did finish at 20-5. You know, and they were all on a Saturday. So a lot of the things the game has changed beyond all recognition. Balls are lighter, pitches are better. If you look at some of the old games on television when they show them, they're mud heaps. Players are fitter, you know, different diet. But you'll have great stars in every era, and it's about, you know, you can only be the best in your era. And it's a good pub argument, but that's all it is, really. You can only be the best in your era. And for me, the game has never lost its magic. Yes, it's super big business now. Yes, the games are played at times which are not always convenient for the fans, which I fully understand. And yes, the players seem to be far more distant than they were, and that's a fact. I mean, famous footballer Ronnie Moran played for Liverpool. He used to go on the same bus the fans were going up with his boots wrapped up in brown paper, you know. But it still absolutely engages me. Although I also like a break from it. So I think this summer of great Wimbledon tennis, fantastic Test cricket, a decent British Grand Prix, and now the Women's World Cup have come into it, has made for a different approach. I mean, the Women's World Cup is rattling along really well, and the Premier League season is around the corner, as is the rest of the football hierarchy. But just those few weeks of tennis and cricket were just refreshing for me. I love the game though. I always will. I think the explosion of the women's game with the Lionesses has been really positive and powerful for young people, young girls, and the internationalization of our domestic game has its ups and downs and its pros and cons, but we've seen some fantastic footballers. And when the Premier League started, a lot of those players we got the foreign players coming over to really have a paycheck at the end of their careers. We don't now. We have some of the world's greatest players. And the leagues below it are really competitive, super competitive. And I also, my favourite football, I watch my son play every Saturday afternoon if I can't get to a game. And it's still the best football I ever see because I kick every ball for him. You know, it's great. It's a great game. I think the books I've written 3 or 4, hopefully have engaged people. And if nothing else, my love of the game has come over in them.
Definitely, mate. Definitely, yeah. So, are there any other projects in the pipeline in the near future, Brian?
I've got a book I want to write about boxing, actually. But
Oh, fantastic!
I haven't quite. I love heavyweight boxing, so and I'd like to have a breather from writing about. People always expect me to write about and talk about football, and I can do it all day and night. But occasionally, it's nice to do something else. But more than that, I'm retiring. Really, I'm 60. I'm in my 70th year, which isn't. And I started work when I was, I don't know, 21, 22. So that's a long time, and it's enough, isn't it? It's enough for everybody.
Well, of course.
It's
time to become a full-time spectator rather than a participant.
Which I love. Well, I live very close to Brentford, so I've got a season ticket out of Brentford because I can't always get up to Liverpool, and I'm about 10 minutes away from Brentford. So Liverpool will always remain my team, but I'm having a lot of fun with Brentford because they've had 2 great seasons in the Premier League.
So where is the book available?
Yeah, Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining me today, Brian. It's been a great pleasure to speak with you. So join us on Football Geeks next time when we'll be talking to another fabulous football guest. Until then, take care.
Very pleasure. All the very best to you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Take it easy.